Have you ever cared about someone who suddenly pulled away, went cold, acted like you didn't matter? You try texting less, giving space, even going no contact, yet nothing changes. It feels like they're unbreakable, but here's the truth. Avoidant people aren't immune to emotion, they're just experts at hiding from it. And the one thing that truly shakes them isn't chasing, begging, or disappearing. It's something much deeper and much more powerful. When we talk about avoidant people, it's easy to misunderstand them as cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable by choice. But that interpretation misses something important. Avoidant behavior is not about a lack of feelings, it's about a learned way of protecting those feelings. Many people with avoidant tendencies actually feel deeply, but somewhere along the way, they learn that expressing those emotions or depending on others could lead to disappointment, rejection, or loss of control. So instead of risking that pain again, they adapted by creating emotional distance. This pattern often begins early in life. A child who grows up in an environment where their emotional needs are not consistently met may stop expecting comfort or support from others. It's not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, like caregivers who are physically present but emotionally unavailable, or situations where vulnerability is ignored or discouraged. Over time, the child learns that relying on others doesn't feel safe or rewarding. As a result, they begin to rely on themselves for emotional regulation, building a strong sense of independence, but also a habit of suppressing emotional needs. As this child becomes an adult, those early lessons don't just disappear. They show up in relationships. When things are light, casual, and low pressure, avoidant individuals can seem perfectly fine, charming, confident, even deeply engaging. But as soon as emotional intimacy increases, something shifts internally. Closeness starts to feel uncomfortable, even threatening. It can trigger an instinct to pull back, not because they don't care, but because their system is wired to associate closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with risk. This is why avoidant people often seem to send mixed signals. They may show interest, then suddenly become distant. They may care about someone, yet struggle to express it in consistent or reassurance. Ringways. From the outside, this can feel confusing and even hurtful, but from their perspective, it's a way of maintaining emotional safety. Distance gives them a sense of control. It allows them to avoid feeling overwhelmed or dependent. Another key aspect of the avoidant mindset is the strong value placed on independence. For them, self-reliance isn't just a preference, it's a core identity. Depending on someone else can feel like losing a part of themselves. So even when they are in a relationship, they may resist anything that feels like too much emotional demand. They might avoid deep conversations, withdraw during conflict, or downplay the importance of the relationship altogether. Again, this isn't necessarily because the relationship doesn't matter, but because they are trying to protect their sense of autonomy. It's also important to understand that avoidant individuals often suppress their own awareness of emotions. It's not just that they don't show feelings to others, they may struggle to fully recognize or process those feelings themselves. This can make it difficult for them to communicate clearly or respond in emotionally attuned ways. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," "Med," or "I need space," they might simply disappear or become distant, leaving the other person confused. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting hurtful behavior without boundaries. It simply gives context. When you realize that avoidance is rooted in protection rather than indifference, it changes how you interpret their actions. You begin to see that their distance is less about your worth and more about their internal patterns. And that perspective can be empowering, because it shifts your focus away from trying to fix or chase them and toward understanding the dynamic more clearly. In a motivational sense, this awareness is powerful. It reminds you that you are not dealing with someone who is unfeeling, but someone who has learned to feel in a guarded way. And while you cannot change another person's patterns on your own, you can choose how you respond. You can decide not to take their distance as a reflection of your value, and instead focus on building your own emotional strength and clarity. People often believe that going silent, cutting off communication completely, is the ultimate move that will make someone miss them, regret their behavior, and come back changed. It is commonly called no contact, and while it can be powerful for personal healing, It doesn't work the way many expect when it comes to avoidant individuals. In fact, in many situations, silence alone doesn't challenge them at all. Instead, it can unintentionally reinforce the very pattern they are most comfortable with, distance. To understand why, you have to look at how avoidant people process emotional pressure. Closeness, expectations, and intense emotional engagement can feel overwhelming to them. When a relationship becomes too demanding or emotionally charged, their instinct is to create space. That space is not just physical, it's psychological. It gives them relief. It allows them to regain a sense of control and independence. So when someone suddenly disappears through no contact, instead of feeling broken, an avoidant person may initially feel calm, even comfortable. The pressure is gone. The need to respond, explain, or engage emotionally is removed. This is where many people misinterpret the situation. They expect silence to create longing or urgency, but in the avoidant mind, it often does the opposite, at least at first. Without emotional demands, they can settle back into their routine. They may distract themselves with work, hobbies, or other aspects of life. Because they are used to suppressing emotions, they don't immediately process the absence in the same way someone more emotionally expressive might. It's not that they don't notice it, it's that they don't rush to act on it. Another important factor is that avoidant individuals tend to devalue emotional intensity when it feels overwhelming. If the relationship previously involved conflict, pressure, or strong emotional needs, then it's time to reevaluate the relationship. They may have already started creating mental distance before no contact even began. In that case, silence can actually confirm their internal narrative that stepping back was the right decision. Instead of pulling them closer, it can make the separation feel justified and easier to maintain. There's also a deeper psychological layer. Avoidant people are often highly self-reliant. They are used to meeting their own needs and not depending heavily on others for emotional support. Because of this, the absence of one person, while it may matter, does not necessarily create an immediate sense of emotional urgency. They don't automatically think, I need to fix this right now. Their instinct is more likely to be, I'll handle this on my own, in my own time, or even to avoid addressing it altogether. This doesn't mean no contact is useless. It simply means its power is often misunderstood. Its real value lies in what it does for you, not what it forces someone else to feel. When used correctly, no contact creates space for you to regain clarity, rebuild your emotional balance, and step out of a cycle that may have been draining. It helps you break patterns of chasing, overthinking, or seeking validation from someone who may not be able to provide it consistently. Over time, something interesting can happen. Once the emotional intensity is gone and enough time has passed, an avoidant person may begin to process the absence more deeply. Without pressure, their defenses can lower slightly, and they may start to reflect on what they lost. But this is not guaranteed, and it does not happen on a predictable timeline. It depends on their level of self-awareness and willingness to confront their own patterns. This is why relying on no contact as a strategy to make someone feel something is risky. It places your sense of outcome in someone else's internal process, one that is often slow, guarded, and uncertain. A more grounded perspective is to see no contact as a boundary rather than a tactic. It's not about controlling their reaction. It's about choosing not to engage in a dynamic that isn't meeting your needs. In a motivational sense, this shifts the entire mindset. Instead of waiting for silence to produce a reaction, you begin to focus on what you can control: your own growth, your own stability, and your own direction. You stop measuring success by whether they reach out, and start measuring it by how much stronger and clearer you feel without the confusion. And that shift, more than silence itself, is where real power begins. One of the most common reactions when someone starts pulling away is to move closer, try harder, and give more. It feels natural when you sense distance. You want to close the gap. You might send more messages, ask for reassurance, try to fix things, or show even more care in the hope that it will bring the other person back. But when dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies, this instinct can have the opposite effect. Instead of drawing them in, it often pushes them further away. To understand why, you have to look at what pursuit represents in the mind of an avoidant person. For them, Intense attention or emotional pursuit can feel like pressure rather than affection. It can trigger a sense that expectations are rising, that they are being relied upon in ways that feel uncomfortable, or that they might lose their independence. Even if your intentions are genuine and caring, the way it is perceived internally can be very different. What feels like connection to you may feel like obligation or overwhelm to them. This creates a cycle that can be difficult to break. The more one person senses distance and tries to fix it through effort and closeness, the more the avoidant individual feels the need to create space. And the more they withdraw, the stronger the urge becomes to chase. It turns into a push and pull dynamic, where both people are reacting to each other in ways that unintentionally reinforce the problem. Neither side is necessarily wrong in what they feel, but the interaction between those feelings creates tension and distance. Another important layer is how avoidant individuals interpret emotional intensity. When someone expresses strong needs for reassurance, clarity, or closeness, it can activate their fear of being overwhelmed. They may start to feel that they are not capable of meeting those expectations, or that the relationship is becoming too demanding. Rather than communicating that fear directly, they often respond by pulling back. This can include taking longer to reply, becoming less expressive, or creating physical and emotional distance. From the outside, it may look like they are losing interest, but internally, it is often a protective reaction. Chasing also shifts the balance of the relationship in a subtle but powerful way. When one person consistently pursues and the other withdraws, it creates an imbalance of emotional investment. The pursuer begins to focus more and more on the other person, sometimes at the expense of their own needs, routines, and sense of self. Meanwhile, the avoidant individual may begin to take that attention for granted or feel even less motivated to move closer, because the dynamic already gives them space without requiring effort on their part. Over time, this imbalance can lead to frustration, resentment, and emotional exhaustion. It's also worth noting that avoidant individuals often value autonomy very highly. They want to feel that their choices are their own, not influenced by pressure or expectation. When they sense that someone is trying to pull them closer through repeated effort or emotional appeals, it can feel like a loss of control. Even if they do care, they may resist moving toward the relationship simply because they want to preserve that sense of independence. In this way, chasing doesn't just fail to bring them closer, it can actually reinforce their instinct to maintain distance. None of this means that expressing care or communicating your needs is wrong. The issue is not connection itself, but the intensity and persistence of pursuit when it is not being reciprocated. Healthy connection involves mutual effort, where both people are moving toward each other in a balanced way. When that balance is missing, increasing effort on one side rarely fixes the problem. Instead, it often deepens the existing pattern. In a motivational sense, recognizing this dynamic is a turning point. It challenges the idea that more effort always leads to better results. Sometimes, the strongest move is not to push harder, but to step back and observe what is actually being returned. It's about understanding that your energy has value, and where you invest it matters. When you stop chasing, you create space not as a tactic to control someone else, but as a way to protect your own emotional well-being. This shift is not always easy, especially when you care deeply. It requires patience, self-awareness, and the ability to tolerate uncertainty, but it also restores a sense of balance and dignity. Instead of trying to convince someone to meet you at your level, you begin to align yourself with relationships where effort flows both ways. And in doing so, you move out of a cycle of pursuit and withdrawal and into a space where connection feels more natural, stable, and genuine. When people find themselves caught in a cycle with someone who pulls away, their focus often becomes external. They watch for replies, analyze behavior, wait for signs, and measure their own value based on how the other person responds. Over time, this creates a kind of emotional dependency where your mood, confidence, and sense of stability begin to rise and fall based on someone else's actions. This is exactly where the dynamic becomes unbalanced and where real change begins, not by trying to control the other person, but by shifting your focus back to yourself. Emotional independence is not about shutting down your feelings or pretending you don't care. It's about caring without losing yourself in the process. It means you can feel connection, attraction, even attachment, but you are not defined by it. Your identity, your peace, and your direction are not tied to whether someone texts you back, shows up consistently, or meets your expectations. Instead, they are grounded in your own sense of self. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this shift is significant. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to pressure, expectations, and emotional dependence. When they sense that someone's happiness or stability is heavily tied to them, it can feel overwhelming. It creates an unspoken responsibility that they may not feel equipped or willing to carry. As a result, they pull back to regain space. But when that pressure is removed, when the other person stands on their own, emotionally the entire dynamic changes. Emotional independence communicates something powerful without needing words. It shows that you value connection, but you do not depend on it for your sense of worth. You are choosing the relationship, not clinging to it. This creates a different kind of presence, one that is calm, grounded, and self-assured. Instead of trying to hold on to someone, you are simply standing in your own space, allowing them to meet you there if they choose to. This doesn't happen overnight. It requires intentional effort to shift habits that may have developed over time. One part of this process is redirecting your attention. Instead of constantly thinking about what the other person is doing, you begin to invest in your own life, your goals, your routines, your growth. You rebuild parts of yourself that may have been neglected while you were focused on the relationship. This could be as simple as reconnecting with friends, pursuing personal interests, or improving your physical and mental well-being. These actions are not distractions, they are foundations. Another part of emotional independence is learning to regulate your own emotions without relying on external validation. This means sitting with uncertainty instead of immediately trying to resolve it through action. It means recognizing that not every feeling requires a response, and not every situation needs to be fixed instantly. Over time, this builds resilience. You become less reactive and more stable, which changes how you show up in all areas of your life, not just relationships. It's also important to set clear internal boundaries. Emotional independence includes knowing what you will and will not accept. When someone is inconsistent, distant, or unable to meet your needs, you don't chase them to change. Instead, you acknowledge the reality of the situation and decide how it aligns with your standards. This doesn't come from anger or ego, it comes from clarity. You are no longer trying to convince someone to value you. You are deciding whether their behavior matches what you are willing to accept. Interestingly, this shift often has an unexpected effect. When you stop centering your world around someone else, they may begin to notice the difference. The dynamic that once felt predictable, where you were always available, always reaching out, always trying, has changed. You are no longer filling the space with constant attention. This can create a sense of curiosity or even respect, because the interaction is no longer driven by pressure or neediness. However, this is not something to rely on as an outcome. The real purpose of emotional independence is not to trigger a reaction in someone else, but to restore balance within yourself. In a motivational sense, emotional independence is a form of strength that goes beyond any single relationship. It teaches you that your value is not something that has to be proven or earned through someone else's approval. It already exists, and your role is to recognize it and live in alignment with it. When you operate from that place, your choices become clearer. You stop chasing situations that drain you, and you start creating a life that supports you. This is where the real transformation happens, not in trying to change another person, but in changing the way you relate to yourself. When you stand firmly in your own identity, your energy shifts from seeking validation to expressing confidence. And that shift doesn't just affect one dynamic, it changes how you approach everything, from relationships to personal growth to the direction of your life. At the core of every healthy relationship dynamic is a quiet but powerful force: self-worth. It's not loud, it doesn't demand attention, and it doesn't need to prove itself. It shapes every decision you make, every boundary you set, and every situation you choose to stay in or walk away from. When self-worth is strong, you approach relationships from a place of balance. When it's shaky, you can find yourself tolerating confusion, inconsistency, and emotional distance far longer than you should. Self-worth is often misunderstood as confidence or outward strength, but it goes deeper than that. It's the internal belief that you are valuable, regardless of how someone else treats you. It's the ability to separate your identity from another person's behavior. When someone is distant, unclear, or inconsistent, self-worth allows you to recognize that their actions are a reflection of them, not a measurement of you. Without that foundation, it's easy to internalize their behavior and start questioning your own value. In dynamics involving avoidant individuals, this becomes especially important. Avoidant patterns can create a lot of uncertainty. One moment there may be closeness, and the next, distance. This inconsistency can trigger a strong emotional response, especially if you are seeking clarity or reassurance. Without solid self-worth, it's easy to fall into the trap of trying to earn consistency by being more patient, more understanding, or more accommodating. You may start to believe that if you just do the right things, say the right words, or give enough space, the other person will eventually meet you halfway. But this mindset quietly shifts the focus away from where it should be. Instead of asking, "Is this relationship meeting my needs?" you begin asking, "What can I do to make this person stay?" That shift can lead to overextending yourself, ignoring red flags, and accepting behavior that doesn't align with your standards. Over time, this erodes your sense of stability and leaves you feeling drained. Self-worth interrupts that cycle. It brings you back to a place of clarity. When you genuinely value yourself, you don't chase consistency, you expect it. You don't beg for clarity, you require it. And when those things are not present, you don't immediately try to fix the other person. Instead, you step back and evaluate whether the situation aligns with what you deserve. This doesn't come from arrogance or entitlement. It comes from respect for yourself and for the kind of relationship you want to build. Another important aspect of self-worth is how it influences your emotional reactions. When your sense of value is tied to someone else's behavior, every change in their mood or attention can feel significant. A delayed response can create anxiety. A shift in tone can lead to overthinking. But when your self-worth is grounded, those same situations don't carry the same weight. You may still notice them, but they don't define your emotional state. You remain steady because your foundation is internal, not external. This steadiness changes how you show up in interactions. You become less reactive and more intentional. You communicate your needs clearly without fear of pushing someone away. And if the other person responds with distance or avoidance, you don't immediately chase to close the gap. You allow their behavior to speak for itself. This creates a natural filter in your life. People who can meet you with consistency and respect will stay, and those who cannot will gradually fall away. It's also worth understanding that self-worth is not something you suddenly have or don't have. It's built over time through small, consistent choices. Every time you choose not to overextend yourself for someone who isn't reciprocating, you strengthen it. Every time you honor your boundaries instead of ignoring them, you reinforce it. And every time you walk away from a situation that doesn't align with your values, you deepen it. These moments may feel difficult in the short term, but they create long-term stability. In the context of avoidant dynamics, self-worth has a subtle but noticeable impact. When you no longer accept inconsistency as normal, the dynamic itself begins to shift. You are no longer participating in the same pattern. You are not chasing, not over-explaining, not trying to prove your value. You are simply showing up as someone who knows their worth and expects to be treated accordingly. This can feel unfamiliar to someone who is used to distance and imbalance, and it often leads to a change in how they perceive the interaction. However, the real purpose of self-worth is not to change someone else's behavior. It's to change your own experience. It's about creating a life where your emotional stability does not depend on someone else's choices. When you operate from that place, you don't lose yourself in uncertainty. You don't stay stuck in cycles that drain you. You move forward with clarity, making decisions that support your well-being rather than compromise it. Ultimately, self-worth is the turning point because it shifts your role in the dynamic. You are no longer trying to be chosen, you are doing the choosing. And that change, more than anything else, is what restores balance, dignity, and direction in your life. One of the hardest but most transformative shifts a person can make is learning how to let go without carrying bitterness. When you've invested time, emotion, and energy into someone, especially someone who has been inconsistent or distant, it's natural to feel hurt. That hurt can easily turn into frustration, resentment, or even a desire to prove something. You may want them to realize your value, to regret their actions, or to come back and acknowledge what they lost. Those feelings are human, but holding on to them keeps you emotionally tied to the very dynamic you're trying to move beyond. Letting go without bitterness is not about pretending nothing happened or suppressing your emotions. It's about processing what you experienced in a way that allows you to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. Bitterness, in many ways, is a form of attachment. It keeps your focus on the past and on the person who caused the pain. Even if they are no longer physically present in your life, they continue to occupy space in your mind, influencing your thoughts and emotional state. True detachment, on the other hand, creates space for clarity, peace, and new direction. This kind of detachment begins with acceptance, not approval, not agreement, but acceptance of reality as it is. It means recognizing that the person you were dealing with has their own patterns, limitations, and ways of dealing with emotions. It means understanding that no amount of effort on your part could force them to show up in a way they were not ready or able to. This realization can be difficult because it challenges the belief that if you had done something differently, the outcome would have changed. But once you accept that their behavior is rooted in their own internal world, not your worth, it becomes easier to release the need to fix or rewrite the past. Another important part of letting go without bitterness is shifting your perspective from loss to learning. Every experience, even painful ones, carries insight. You begin to see the patterns more clearly, the moments where you ignored your own needs, the times you overextended yourself, or the ways you tried to hold on to something that wasn't fully present. This reflection is not about blaming yourself, it's about understanding your own responses so you can grow from them. Instead of walking away with resentment, you walk away with awareness. Emotional maturity plays a key role here. It's the ability to feel deeply without becoming consumed by those feelings. It allows you to acknowledge hurt, disappointment, or frustration without letting those emotions define your actions moving forward. Rather than reacting impulsively or holding on to anger, you choose a response that aligns with your long-term well-being. This doesn't mean you won't feel moments of sadness or even VSP or MEN, AAA, of what could have been. It means those feelings no longer control your direction. Letting go without bitterness also restores your sense of control. When you are focused on someone else's actions, you are constantly reacting. Your thoughts revolve around what they did, what they didn't do, and what it all means. This keeps you in a passive position, waiting for something external to change. But when you release that focus, you reclaim your energy. You begin to invest it in your own life, your goals, your relationships, your growth. The attention that was once tied up in overthinking is now available for building something meaningful. There is also a quiet strength in walking away with peace instead of anger. It reflects a level of self-respect that doesn't need validation. You are not trying to prove a point or win a battle. You are simply choosing what aligns with your values and leaving behind what doesn't. This kind of closure doesn't depend on a conversation, an apology, or a final explanation. It comes from within, from the decision to stop seeking answers in a place where they may never be fully given. Over time, this approach changes how you view relationships altogether. You become less attached to outcomes and more focused on alignment. You understand that not every connection is meant to last, and that some people come into your life to teach you something rather than stay. This doesn't make the experience meaningless, it gives it purpose. It becomes part of your growth rather than a source of ongoing pain. In the context of avoidant dynamics, letting go without bitterness can be especially powerful. It breaks the cycle of emotional highs and lows, of hope followed by confusion. You are no longer waiting for them to change or to validate your experience. You have already made peace with what was, and you are moving forward with clarity. This shift is often unexpected because it removes the emotional tension that once defined the connection. There is no pressure, no pursuit, no resentment, just distance and calm. Ultimately, the real power is not in making someone else feel something. It's in freeing yourself from the need for them to. When you reach that point, you are no longer reacting to the past, you are creating your future. And that is where true strength, confidence, and peace begin to take root.